Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will understand section 14 to 36 of general exceptions under BNS 2023. General exceptions explain situations where an act may look like a crime, but the law clearly says that no criminal punishment should be given. In the criminal law, normally two things are required for punishment. One is a guilty act, other one is a guilty intention. But sometimes and in some situations, even if the act is done, the law excuses the person because the intention is missing or because the law itself gives permission or protection. These situations are called general exceptions. Now let us look at section 14 of BNS. The section 14 mainly talks about a situation where a person does an act because the law tells him to do it. In simple words, if the law requires a person to perform a duty and doing that duty is not a crime. The idea behind this section is very clear. The law cannot punish a person for following the orders given by the law or following the law. Many times, the law puts compulsory duties on people, especially on public officers. And if they do not perform those duties, they may themselves be punished by the law. So, to avoid that, right, when a person performs such a legal duty, even if it affects someone else, criminal liability does not arise. But again, this protection is not unlimited. The person must act only within the power given by the law. If he goes behind his authority or uses powers wrongly, this section will not protect him. Example: a police officer arrests a person using a valid court warrant, even though that arrest affect a personal freedom under Article 21, which is right to life. The officer is only following the law, so no offense is committed. The key point here is to remember that the law never punishes a person for doing what the law itself orders. Now let us move on to section 15. Section 15 applies when a person honestly believes that the law requires him to do an act, but in reality the law does not requires. This belief must be because of a mistake of fact, not because of person misunderstood the law. The person must act honestly, carefully, and without any criminal intention. Even if later it is found that the belief was wrong, the law will still give protection if the belief was reasonable. Example: a police officer arrests the wrong person. Means court was asked to arrest one person, but the police officer arrested the other person, that is wrong person, because he honestly believes that the warrant applies to him due to wrong information. But if the belief is careless or dishonest, this section will not apply. The key point to remember here under the section 15 is it protects honest mistakes about the facts, not ignorance of the law. Now let us look at section 16, act justified by the law. Section 16 mainly deals with acts that are clearly allowed by the law. When the law itself permits to do some acts, doing that act can never be treated as a crime. The permission must exist at the time of doing the act, and the act must be done according to the legal rules given by the law. If a person goes behind what the law allows, this protection will not apply. For example, a judge passes a lawful sentence after following proper legal procedure. Even though the sentence affects liberty, freedom, The judge commits no offense because the law allows it. The key point here to remember is that what the law itself allows can never be a crime. Next one is section 17, that is mistake believing justified by the law. This section 17 mainly applies when a person honestly believes that his act is allowed by the law, but this belief is based on wrong facts. If the facts were actually true, the act would have been legal. The belief must be honest and reasonable. If the proper if the proper person acts carelessly or without proper care, this section will not protect him. This section 17 does not protect mistakes about law, it only protects honest mistakes about facts. Example, a public officer uses force, believing that he has legal authority, but later it is found that such authority did not exist. So the key point here is to remember that section 17 protects honest belief based on facts, not careless actions. And the next one is section 18. This is accident. Now let us see what section 18 says, that when harm is caused by accident without any criminal intention while doing a lawful activity, it is not treated as a crime. The person must have taken proper care. If the harm happens because of negligence or carelessness, this section will not apply. So, accident and negligence are not the same. For an example, during lawful construction of a work or construction of a building, if any injury happens even after following safety measurements, then there will not be any punishment. This is one general exceptions of under BNS. The key point here is to remember that section 18 protects accidents, not careless behavior. And the next one is section 19, acts done to prevent greater harm. Now let us understand what section 19 is mainly deals with. It is based on the idea of necessity. Sometimes a person has to cause a small harm in order to prevent a much bigger danger. If the act is done honestly and only to avoid a greater harm, the law excuses such an act or such a situation cannot be punished. The harm caused must be reasonable and not more than what is needed. Example, breaking a glass or breaking a locked door to save a child who is trapped inside a burning house cannot be treated as a crime, and it is comes under general exception rules. The key point here is to remember under section 19 is that the law allows a small harm to prevent a bigger danger. Now let us look at section 22. Child who attains below 7 years of age. This section 20 applies to children who are under 7 years of age. The law clearly assumes that a child having 7 years or below 7 years does not have a sound mind, and they will not understand the nature of a crime and cannot form a criminal intention themselves. This assumption is final and absolute. It cannot be even questioned or proved otherwise. Because of this, no criminal punishment can be given, no matter how serious the act may look like. The focus here is not on the act but on the child's lack of understanding or lack of sound mind. For an example, a 5 years old child takes money or sweets from a shop, even though the act looks like theft. the child cannot be punished under the criminal law. The key point here is to remember under section 20 is that whoever below 7 years, the law is no criminal mind at all. Now let us look at section 21. Child between the age of 7 above and 12 years. This section 21 applies to children between 7 and 12 years of age. At this age, some children may understand their actions while others may not understand their actions. So the law does not give automatic protection. Instead, the court looks at the child's mental maturity and understanding of the act. If the child did not understand that the act was wrong or serious, criminal liability will not arise. But if the child clearly understood the consequences, then punishment may be given. For example, a 10 years old guy damaged property without understanding its seriousness. If the court finds lack of understanding, section 21 will protect the child. Between 7 and 12, everything depends on their maturity, their understanding, and their mental maturity. This is the key point in section 21. Now let us look at section 22. This section 22 applies to a person of unsound mind. If a person is not able to understand what he is doing or does not know that the act is wrong or illegal, the law does not punish him. The most important point in this is that the unsoundness of mind must exist at the time when the act is done. Past illness or future illness is not enough. Courts rely on medical reports, behavior, and surrounding circumstances to decide this. If an, for example, a mentally ill person commits violence during a period of serious mental illness, if he could not understand his act at that time, the section 22 will protect him. The key point here under this section 22 is that criminal law punishes guilty minds, not about the sick minds. The next one is section 23, mistake of fact, believing the act is allowed by the law. This section 23 mainly applies when a person does not act because of mistake of fact, believing that the law allows him to do that act. The person honestly believes that because of certain facts the act is legally allowed. The mistake must be about facts, not about the law. If the facts were actually true, the act would have been legal. The person must act honestly and carefully. If the act is careless or dishonest, the section will not protect him. For example, a police officer arrests a person believing him to be the offender based on wrong information. If the belief is honest and reasonable, the section 23 protects the officer. The key point under this section 23 is that it protects honest mistakes about the facts, not the law. Now let us move to section 24. This section 24 applies when a person believes because of wrong facts that the law requires him to do an act. The belief must be honest and reasonable. There must be no intention to commit a crime. Only mistake of fact is protected here. Mistake of law is not protected. This section is different from section 23. Here the person believes he must act, not just that he is allowed to act. For example, a public officer performs an act believing it is his legal duty, but later it is found that no such duty exists. This is mainly protects honest belief of legal duty based on facts. The section 25 act done with the consent. This protects acts done with the consent of the person who is harmed. The consent that was given by the harmed person must be real. It must be given freely without force, fear, coercive, or pressure. The person giving consent must be capable of understanding what he is agreeing to. However, there are clear limits. Acts intended to cause death or serious injury are not protected under this section, even if the consent is given by the harmed person. Illegal acts such as causing death or serious injury cannot be justified by the consent. For an example, in a sports match, players agree to play the game. If an injury happens during normal play, Section 25 protects the act. Consent excuses harm but not the serious crime. That is the key point to remember under this section. Now let us understand section 26. It applies to a situation where a person acts without consent but the act is done honestly for the benefit of other person. Usually consent is important, but sometimes consent cannot be taken, especially in urgent or emergency situations. In such cases, the law allows a person to act without consent if the intention of the person is only to help another proper care is taken and improper care is taken. There should be no intention to cause harm. The act must be reasonable and only what is necessary in that situation. For an example, a doctor performs emergency surgery to save a patient's life when consent cannot be obtained in time. The key point here under this section 26 is to remember that in emergencies, helping honestly is more important than the consent. Now let us move to section 27. This section 27 applies when an act is done for the benefit of a child or a person of unsound mind. Such persons may not be able to understand the situation or give valid consent. So the law allows parents, guardians or caretakers to act on their behalf. The act must be done honestly and only for safety or welfare. Cruelty of punishment is not allowed. For an example, guardian restraining a violent child to prevent the child from harming himself or others. The key point under this section 27 is to remember that law allows protection, not punishment, of vulnerable persons. Now let us understand section 28. It explains when consent is not valid in law. If consent is obtained by fear, force, threat, or misunderstanding of facts, then such consent is treated as no consent. For consent to be valid, the person must understand what he is agreeing to and must agree freely. Consent taken by cheating, pressure, or false information gives no protection. If we look at example, a person agrees to an act only because he is threatened. Such consent is not valid under law. The key point here is to remember consent has value only when it is free and informed. Le- Now let's look at section 29. It applies when act is done with consent and also in good faith. The act must be intended for the benefit of the person who has given consent. Proper care must be taken and there should be no intention to cause death or serious injury. This section recognizes that some acts involve risks but are still lawful when done carefully. For an example, a doctor performs a risky medical procedure after explaining the risks and taking proper consent from the patient. The key point here is to remember that consent with honesty and care gives legal protection. Now let us understand section 30. This protects communication made in good faith. Sometimes a person has to share information that may cause fear, worry, or discomfort, but the intention is to protect or help someone. If the communication that was shared is honest, made carefully, and meant for the benefit of the other person, the law gives the protection. There should be no intention to harm reputation or to cause unnecessary trouble. For an example, a doctor informs a patient about a serious disease so that timely treatment can be taken by the patient. Here, the key point is to remember that honest warning given to protect is not a crime. Next one is section 31. Act done under threat of immediate death. This section 31 applies when a person commits an act under threat of immediate death. The threat must be serious, continuous, and leave no safe option to escape. The law understands that in such extreme situation, a person may act to save his own life. However, this protection is limited. It does not apply to all the offences. For an example, a person commits robbery because someone threatens to kill him if he refuses. Law excuses act done to save life under extreme threat. This is the key point to remember under section 31. Now, let us understand section 32. This section 32 gives every person the right to protect his own body or the body of the another person. This right arises when there is a real and reasonable fear of harm. The force used must be necessary and only to the extent required to stop the danger. There is no right of private defense against lawful acts of public servants. A person defends himself when attacked by a violent offender. This can be considered as an example under this section. The key point here is to remember that private defense allows protection but not the revenge. The next one is section 33, right of private defense of property. The right to protect property this section is mainly deals with. A person may defend his property against offences like theft, robbery, mischief, or criminal trespass. Only reasonable force is allowed. The person is to protect property, not to punish the offender. Example, a house owner stops a thief from stealing property. Property can be protected but within the limits. Now let us look at section 34, limits of private defense. Excessive or unnecessary force is not allowed under this section. After the threat is over, any further action becomes illegal. For example, attacking a person after he has already run away. The key point to remember is private defense stops when danger stops. Now let us look at section 35, that is private defense causing death while defending the body. There must be serious and immediate threat to life and no other safe option must be available. The force used must be necessary to save the life. This section applies only in rare and serious situations. For example, a person kills an attacker to save his own life when escape is not possible. Taking life is allowed only to save the life. That is a key point to remember here. And the last one is private defense causing death, that is property, while defending the property. This section 36 applies to very serious offences against property, especially when they happen at night. If such offense create a real danger to life and there is no other option, causing death may be justified. This section applies carefully and only in exceptional cases. Example, a house owner kills a dacoit during a night robbery when his life is in danger. The key point under this section 36 is to remember that even property defense can extend to life protection in extreme cases. So these are the section 14 to 36 of general exceptions under the BNS 2023. If you found this video helpful, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for watching.